The 7-foot giant seized Stallone by the throat and drove him spine first into the concrete wall before the crowd even finished roaring his name. Stallone's feet dangled 6 inches off the ground, his fists hammering uselessly against forearms thicker than most men's thighs, and every person in that basement believed they were about to watch a movie star die. What happened in the next 12 minutes would become underground Los Angeles legend, a story whispered about for decades. Stallone's back hit the concrete wall so hard the plaster cracked behind him, and the 7-foot giant standing across the basement didn't even look like he'd tried yet. The man just rolled his neck, shook out hands the size of dinner plates, and took another step forward. What happened in the next 45 minutes would become Los Angeles underground legend, a story whispered about for decades by fighters, stuntmen, and Hollywood insiders who still argue about what they saw that night. Let me take you there. It's the fall of 1978, and Sylvester Stallone is the most bankable human being on planet Earth. Rocky came out 2 years prior, won Best Picture, made him a god. Rocky II is deep in pre-production. Stallone is training 6 hours a day, boxing with real fighters, getting his body into the kind of shape that makes other actors look like mannequins. The man is 5'9", 200 pounds, thick through the shoulders, fast with his hands, and absolutely convinced that he's not just playing a fighter. He believes he is one, and that belief is about to get tested in a way nobody predicted. Believe me. Here's how it started. Stallone had a habit back then that his handlers hated. He'd go out at night, sometimes alone, sometimes with 1 or 2 guys, and he'd visit underground fighting venues across LA. Not sanctioned boxing gyms, not the fancy places in Beverly Hills where producers shadowboxed for cardio. No. He went to the real spots. Warehouses in East LA, basements in the valley, converted loading docks near the ports where men fought for cash and reputation, and sometimes just because someone looked at them wrong. Stallone didn't just watch. He talked to fighters. He trained with them. He'd put on gloves and spar with guys who had no idea who he was. Guys who didn't care. Guys who would have hit the Pope if the Pope stepped into the ring. It was research, he told himself. It was preparation for Rocky II. But the truth was simpler than that. The man loved to fight. He loved the electricity of it. He loved the sound his fist made when it landed clean. He loved knowing he could take a shot and stay standing. That particular Thursday night in October, Stallone walked into a basement venue underneath a pool hall on Figueroa Street. The place had no sign. You had to know a guy who knew a guy. Stallone knew the right guy, a stuntman named Eddie Vega, who'd worked on Paradise Alley. Eddie met him at the side door, and the moment Stallone walked down those concrete stairs, he felt the air change. It was hot. It was tight. There were maybe 60 people packed into a space meant for 30, and standing in the center of the room, under a single caged bulb, was the biggest human being Stallone had ever seen outside of a movie screen. Get this. The man's name was Carl Jansen, 7 feet tall, 330 pounds, a wrestler out of Hamburg, Germany, who'd been tearing through underground circuits from Chicago to San Francisco for the better part of a year. His record, as far as anyone could verify, was somewhere around 30 wins and 0 losses. Not 30 boxing wins, 30 fights. Anything goes. Submissions, knockouts, guys who simply quit because the pain got too creative. Jansen fought with a style that mixed Greco-Roman wrestling with something dirtier. He'd grab you, control you, take you to the ground, and then hurt you in ways that were technically legal, because in these basements there were no real rules anyway. He had hands that could wrap entirely around a man's skull. His reach was almost 7 feet. When he stood flat-footed and extended his arm, most opponents couldn't even touch his face without jumping. Stallone stood at the bottom of those stairs and watched Jansen warming up, rolling his massive shoulders, bouncing on feet that seemed too light for a man that size. Eddie Vega leaned close and whispered something. Stallone didn't respond. His jaw tightened. His eyes tracked Jansen's movement with the kind of focus that only fighters and predators have in common. Here's what nobody tells you about that night. Stallone wasn't supposed to fight. He was there to watch. Maybe pick up some movement ideas for the Rocky sequel. Maybe just feel the energy. But the man running the venue, a thick-necked promoter everyone called Bishop, had other ideas. Bishop worked the room. He had a microphone wired to 2 speakers mounted on the ceiling, and he used it to announce the fights, hype the crowd, and keep the money moving. Bishop recognized Stallone the second he walked in. Of course he did. Everybody recognized Stallone in 1978. The man's face was on every magazine cover in America. Bishop saw dollar signs. He saw a story. He saw the kind of spectacle that would make his little basement operation legendary. So between fights, Bishop grabbed the microphone and pointed directly at Stallone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest tonight, the Italian stallion himself, Rocky Balboa, in the flesh." The room turned, every head, every pair of eyes. Stallone felt it, that specific weight of 60 people all deciding at once what they thought about him. He squared his shoulders. He didn't shrink. He didn't wave and play the humble celebrity. He just stood there and met their stares. "Listen to me. This is where it could have ended. A normal person would have smiled, shaken some hands, watched the fights, and gone home to his mansion in Pacific Palisades. But Stallone wasn't wired like a normal person. He'd written Rocky alone in his apartment when he had less than $100 to his name. He'd turned down $350,000 for the script because they wouldn't let him star in it. He didn't do safe. Safe was a disease to him. Bishop kept pushing. "Carl Jansen hasn't lost a fight in over a year. Nobody in Los Angeles will step up. But maybe we got someone here tonight who knows a thing or two about going the distance." The crowd started to buzz. Somebody in the back shouted Rocky's name, then somebody else, then a third voice, louder. It became a chant. "Rocky, Rocky, Rocky." Stallone looked at Eddie Vega. Eddie shook his head. "No, absolutely not. You're filming a sequel. You're insured for $40 million. If you break a hand, the studio will shut down production and sue everyone in this room, including you." Stallone looked back at Jansen. Jansen was already staring at him. And here was the thing about Carl Jansen. He didn't care about movies. He didn't care about fame. He told people in interviews that a boxer only knew one thing, that boxing was a limited art, a narrow skill for men who couldn't handle real fighting. He believed it. And now, standing 20 feet from the most famous boxer character in the world, he saw a chance to prove it in front of witnesses. Jansen spoke for the first time that Stallone could hear. His English was thick, accented, but clear. "The movie star wants to play fighter? Come play." Stallone pulled off his jacket. Eddie Vega grabbed his arm. Stallone looked down at Eddie's hand, then up at Eddie's face and said one sentence. "I didn't come down here to be in the audience." The crowd lost its mind. "I swear this happened." Bishop cleared the center of the room. People pressed against the walls. Somebody dragged 2 folding chairs out of the way. There was no ring, no ropes. Just a rectangle of stained concrete roughly 12 feet by 16 feet, bordered on all sides by human bodies. The overhead lights swung slightly, throwing moving shadows. Rules were stated in about 10 seconds. No biting, no eye gouging. Fight ends by knockout, submission, or if Bishop stops it. That was it. No rounds, no time limit, no gloves unless you brought your own. Stallone had hand wraps in his jacket pocket. Of course he did. The man carried hand wraps everywhere during those years. He wrapped his hands methodically while Jansen stood in the center of the space and waited. Jansen didn't wrap anything. He didn't need to. When your fists are the size of canned hams, wrapping them is redundant. Let me set the picture for you. Stallone, 5'9", 200 pounds, wrapped hands, wearing a black t-shirt and dark jeans and work boots. Across from him, Jansen, 7 feet 330, bare hands, wearing a gray tank top stretched across a chest that looked like it belonged on a draft horse. The size difference was obscene. Stallone's head came up to Jansen's chest. When Jansen extended his arm straight out, his fist would reach Stallone's face, but Stallone's arm fully extended wouldn't touch Jansen's chin by about 6 inches. And yet Stallone stepped forward first. He moved into range before Bishop even officially started the fight. Bishop shouted go, but Stallone was already there, already inside, already throwing. A left jab, fast, snapping, aimed at Jansen's solar plexus, because that was the highest target Stallone could reach without telegraphing. The jab landed. Jansen grunted. The crowd erupted. Jansen's response was immediate and terrifying. He swung a right hand downward, a clubbing overhand that Stallone barely ducked. The fist grazed the top of Stallone's skull and kept going. Stallone felt the wind of it, the raw displacement of air, and he knew instantly that if one of those punches connected clean, the fight was over. Period. no Hollywood ending. So Stallone did what every smart small fighter does against a bigger man. He moved. Laterally. Constantly. He circled to Jansen's left, staying tight to the giant's body where the big man's reach advantage was neutralized. He threw 3 quick hooks to Jansen's ribcage. Hard shots, each one landing with a sound the first row of spectators could feel in their teeth. Jansen's body absorbed them. The man didn't even change his breathing. Now here's where reality separated from the movies. In Rocky, the hero takes punishment and keeps coming forward. That's cinema. In a real fight against a man who outweighs you by 130 pounds and stands nearly 1.5 feet taller, coming forward is suicide. Stallone knew this. His trainers had drilled it into him. He'd sparred with heavyweights. He understood the physics. But Jansen wasn't just a big man with big hands. He was a wrestler. And wrestlers don't need to hit you. They need to grab you. And that's exactly what Jansen did next. Stallone threw a right cross to the body, a beautiful shot, technically perfect. As his weight transferred into the punch, Jansen dropped his arm, clamped it over Stallone's extended right hand, and pulled. Suddenly, Stallone's face was against Jansen's chest, both of Jansen's arms wrapping around him, squeezing. Stallone's feet left the ground. You ever been picked up by someone who genuinely does not care if they break you? There's a moment of complete helplessness that's different from anything else in fighting. Your leverage is gone. Your balance is gone. You're a child in the arms of something that isn't interested in being gentle. Jansen squeezed. Stallone felt his ribs compress. He couldn't breathe in, only out, and each exhale let Jansen tighten the grip further. The crowd went quiet. This was it. This was the part where the movie star got broken in half and everybody went home with a story about how Rocky got folded up in a basement. This is the part you need to hear. Stallone didn't panic. His hands were pinned against Jansen's chest, useless for punching, but his head was free. He reared back and drove his forehead directly into Jansen's nose, not a theatrical headbutt, a real one, short, violent, aimed at the bridge. Blood. Immediate. Jansen's head snapped back, and his grip loosened for exactly 1 second. 1 second was enough. Stallone dropped his weight, slid his hips backward, and tore his right arm free. He planted his feet on the concrete and drove an uppercut into Jansen's chin as the big man's head was still tilted back from the headbutt. Jansen stumbled. 1 step, 2 steps. His back hit the crowd and the people behind him shoved him forward. He caught his balance, wiped his nose with the back of his hand, and looked at the blood. Then he looked at Stallone. Something changed in Jansen's eyes. The amusement was gone. The casual superiority was gone. What replaced it was focus. The kind of focus that tells you a man has decided to stop testing and start finishing. No word of a lie. Jansen charged. Not a boxing advance. A wrestler's bull rush. Head low, arms wide, closing the distance in 2 enormous strides. Stallone sidestepped, or tried to, but the space was too small. There was nowhere to go. Jansen caught him around the waist and drove him backward. Stallone's back hit the concrete wall, and that's the impact I told you about at the beginning. Plaster cracking, bones rattling, the kind of collision you feel in your fillings. Jansen pinned him against the wall and started working. Short knees to the thighs, elbow strikes to the ribs. Each shot was measured, controlled, intended to damage without ending things too quickly. Jansen was a craftsman. He wanted the movie star to feel every second of this. Stallone ate 3 shots to the ribs that would have dropped most men. He felt something give on his left side, maybe a cracked rib, maybe just cartilage separating. But the pain was hot and specific and bad. He tasted copper. His vision narrowed. Here's what separates pretenders from fighters. A pretender, when the pain hits, starts looking for the exit. Mentally, emotionally, they begin the process of quitting. They might not tap out immediately, but their body starts telling their brain to find a way to make this stop. Stallone did the opposite. The pain made him angry, and angry Stallone was a different animal than composed Stallone. He stopped trying to escape the clinch and started fighting inside it. He dropped his chin, tucked his elbows, and began throwing short, brutal punches to Jansen's kidneys and liver. Not the kind of punches that look good on camera, the kind that make a man piss blood for a week. Compact, vicious, repeated, left hook to the liver, right hook to the kidney, left hook to the liver again. Over and over, each one driven by his legs and his hips and a rage that had nothing to do with movies and everything to do with refusing to be dominated. Jansen felt them. You could see it. His breathing changed. His grip shifted. He tried to reposition, to get higher on Stallone's body, to lift him again, but Stallone was too low now, too compact, too planted. The body shots were accumulating, and even a 330-pound man has a liver that can only absorb so much trauma. 30 seconds of this. 40. A full minute of Stallone working the body while Jansen tried to control him against the wall. The crowd was making noise, but Stallone couldn't hear it. He later said the only sound he registered was Jansen's breathing getting heavier and the impact of his own fists against the big man's torso. Then Jansen made his critical mistake. He pushed off. He shoved Stallone against the wall one more time and took 2 steps back, trying to create space, trying to reset. He put his hand on his left side where the liver shots had landed, and for just a moment, his guard dropped. His chin was exposed. His weight was on his back foot. He was hurting. Trust me on this. Stallone saw it, not with his eyes, with whatever instinct fighters develop after thousands of rounds. He saw the opening the way a shark sees a wound in the water, and he moved without thinking. 2 steps forward, closing distance before Jansen could set his feet. A left hook to the body, same spot he'd been working, the liver, and when Jansen's right elbow dropped to protect the damaged area, Stallone changed levels. He came up with a right hand. Not an uppercut, a straight right, thrown from below, driving upward through his legs and hips and shoulders, every pound of his 200 pounds behind it, aimed at the point of Jansen's jaw. The room heard it. That crack, that specific, unmistakable sound of a clean punch landing on an unprotected chin. Jansen's head snapped to the left. His eyes went somewhere else. His knees buckled. He didn't go down all at once. A man that size doesn't fall fast. He went to one knee first, his right hand touching the concrete for balance. Then the other knee. Then his hand slid, and he was on all fours, breathing hard, blood from his nose dripping onto the floor. The room went quiet. Stallone stood over him, fists still up, breathing hard himself, his left side screaming, blood on his forehead from a cut he didn't remember getting. He waited. If Jansen got up, they'd go again. That was the arrangement. No rounds, no 10 count. You fight until it's over. Jansen pushed himself up to one knee. He stayed there. He looked up at Stallone, and what happened next is the part that everyone who was in that room still talks about. Jansen reached out with his right hand, not to grab, not to strike. He put his hand on Stallone's forearm and he squeezed it once gently. Then he said quietly enough that only the first row heard it, "You are not what I expected." Bishop stepped in. He looked at Jansen, still on one knee. He looked at Stallone, standing, wounded, waiting. He raised Stallone's hand. Pay attention to this part. Stallone didn't celebrate. He didn't raise both fists. He didn't mug for the crowd. He pulled his hand away from Bishop, reached down, and helped Carl Jansen to his feet. It took both of Stallone's hands and all of his remaining strength to get the giant upright. Jansen towered over him again, blood on his face, one hand still pressed against his damaged ribs. Stallone looked up at him and said 5 words. "You hit harder than Apollo." That was it. That was the power line. 14 words under the limit, delivered to a man who'd just been beaten, turning a defeat into a compliment. Jansen blinked. Then the big man dropped his head in something that wasn't quite a nod and wasn't quite a bow, but lived somewhere between respect and exhaustion. The crowd broke. Noise. Real noise. The kind of sound that 60 people make when they've just seen something they know they'll never see again. People were slapping Stallone on the back, reaching for him, shouting. Eddie Vega pushed through the crowd and wrapped a jacket around Stallone's shoulders, already calculating how to explain the bruises and the cracked rib to the Rocky II production team. Stallone sat down on one of the folding chairs someone had dragged back out. Somebody handed him a bottle of water. He poured half of it over his head and drank the rest. His left side was already swelling. His hand wraps were soaked pink with blood, some of it his, some of it Jansen's. Here's the thing nobody expected. Jansen didn't leave. The giant sat down on the concrete floor across from Stallone, his back against the opposite wall, and the two men just looked at each other across the room while the chaos continued around them. They didn't speak for about 5 minutes, just two fighters sitting in the wreckage of what they'd done to each other, processing it in silence. Then Jansen stood up, walked across the room and sat down next to Stallone. The folding chair groaned under his weight. He leaned over and said something that nobody else heard. Stallone later told Eddie Vega what it was. Jansen said, "I have fought 31 men. You are the first one who made me believe I could lose. You are also the first one who helped me stand up." Mark my words, that sentence mattered to Stallone. It mattered more than any review, more than any box office number, more than any Oscar speech, because it was real. It came from a man who had no reason to say it except that it was true. The two men sat together for another 10 minutes. Jansen told Stallone about growing up in Hamburg, about how fighting was the only thing that made sense when you were too big for normal life, when people stared at you in grocery stores and children were afraid of you and chairs broke when you sat in them. Stallone listened. He didn't offer advice. He didn't compare struggles. He just listened, which is its own form of respect. And then something happened that transformed this from a fight story into something else entirely. Stallone asked Jansen if he wanted to be in Rocky II, not as a joke, not as a throwaway line. He looked the man in the eye and said, "I could use someone who moves the way you do. The movie needs real fighters, not actors pretending." Jansen shook his head. "I am not an actor." Stallone leaned forward, wincing from his ribs. "Neither was I. I just showed up and refused to leave. Now I need to be straight with you." Jansen never appeared in Rocky II. The studio wouldn't insure him. There was no SAG card, no work visa situation that would have made it possible on the timeline they had. But Stallone didn't forget the man. Over the following weeks he made calls. He connected Jansen with a promoter in Las Vegas who ran legitimate wrestling events. He put in a word with some people in the stunt coordination world. He did what powerful men rarely do, which is use their power for someone who beat them up in a basement. That's the part that kills me. Jansen went on to work as a sparring partner for several heavyweight boxers in the early 1980s. He appeared in a few low-budget action films as a villain, always the huge guy who gets beaten in the third act. He returned to Germany in 1984 and largely disappeared from the American fight scene. But people who knew him said he kept a photograph in his apartment until the day he died. A Polaroid taken that night in the basement on Figueroa Street. Stallone on the left, Jansen on the right, both of them bloody, both of them smiling, and the blurred shapes of 50 or 60 witnesses behind them. You need to know this. Stallone never talked about the fight publicly. Not in interviews, not in his autobiography, not in the behind-the-scenes documentaries for any of the Rocky films. He never confirmed it. He never denied it. When asked about underground fighting by a journalist in 1983, he said only, "I've been in rooms where the stakes were real. That's all I'll say about it." But the story survived because the people who were there couldn't keep it to themselves. Eddie Vega told it to stuntmen, who told it to other stuntmen, who told it to trainers, who told it to fighters. By the time Rocky III came out in 1982, the story of Stallone and the 7-foot German was part of LA fighting folklore. It had been exaggerated, distorted, compressed, and expanded in the way that all oral history is. Some versions had Stallone knocking Jansen out cold. Some had Jansen winning. Some had the fight lasting 20 minutes. Some had it lasting 2 hours. But the core of the story stayed consistent across every telling. Stallone walked into a basement, faced a man who should have destroyed him, took punishment that would have ended most men, found an opening when there shouldn't have been one, and put the giant on his knees with a right hand that came from somewhere deeper than technique. And here's the real ending, the one that matters. When Stallone wrote the script for Rocky II, he changed the final fight. In his original draft, the rematch with Apollo Creed was a technical boxing match, a chess game, 2 skilled fighters solving each other's puzzles. After the night on Figueroa Street, he rewrote the entire third act. He made the fight uglier, more desperate, more painful. He added the moment where both fighters go down at the same time, where the outcome depends not on skill but on who wants it badly enough to stand up first. He wrote from the body, from the ribs, from the specific knowledge of what it feels like to be held against a wall by someone bigger and stronger and to choose consciously to keep fighting anyway. That scene, the double knockdown, became one of the most iconic moments in film history. And it came directly from a basement on Figueroa Street, where Sylvester Stallone learned something that no trainer, no sparring session, and no script could teach him. He learned what he was actually made of. Not Rocky Balboa, not the Italian stallion. Sylvester Stallone, The kid from Hell's Kitchen who talked funny and got told his entire childhood that he'd never amount to anything. If you've been watching this far, hit subscribe. I only tell stories like this because people like you show up for them. One click keeps these stories coming. Now let me finish this the way it deserves. Carl Jansen died in 2003 in a hospital in Hamburg. He was 58 years old. Complications from a lifetime of absorbing punishment from men who were smaller and faster and more desperate than he was. His body had been a weapon, and weapons wear out. When word reached Los Angeles, it traveled through the same network that had carried the fight story for 25 years. Stuntman to stuntman, fighter to fighter. Eventually it reached Eddie Vega, who was retired by then, living in Pasadena. Eddie made one phone call, to Stallone's office. 3 days later, a package arrived at the hospital in Hamburg, addressed to Jansen's family. Inside was a framed poster of Rocky II signed by Stallone. On the bottom, in black marker, Stallone had written 7 words. He hit harder than Apollo, with respect. The family hung it next to the Polaroid. So that's the story. A movie star who was really a fighter walked into a basement and met a fighter who'd never be a movie star. They hurt each other, they respected each other. And the movie star took what he learned in that basement and turned it into art that 3 generations of people have watched and been changed by. Every time you see Rocky Balboa get knocked down and get back up, every time you feel that swell in your chest during the double knockdown in Rocky II, every time you watch a man who should lose refuse to accept that reality, you're watching what Stallone learned on Figueroa Street in October of 1978. You're watching a man who got pinned against a concrete wall by a 7-foot giant and decided that the wall was going to break before he did. You're watching a legend get built in real time, and now you know how it really happened.